We are doing a massive deep dive into Chapter 74 of our physiology source text.
And the title is deceptively simple.
It is Body Temperature Regulation and Fever. But when you look at these notes, I mean, the content is anything but simple.
No, this isn't just about reading a thermometer. This is a story about fluid dynamics. It's about quantum physics. Literally the wavelengths of light that you are emitting right now.
Wild.
It's about neural wiring in the deep brain and, the raw chemistry of how your enzymes function.
We have a really dense stack of sources here, and we're going to unpack all of it. We're going to look at why a nude person just sitting in a comfortable room is technically losing 60% of their body heat through radiation.
And we will definitely clarify that that is not the Chernobyl kind of radiation.
Right. Important distinction. We're also going to break down the specific sort of hydraulic mechanism of sweating, which is way more complex than just water leaking out of your skin.
It's an incredible process.
And we're going to talk about what happens when the whole system decides to reset itself. Why do you shiver when you have a fever? Why does aspirin actually work?
And why sometimes the system just fails completely, which leads to things like heat stroke or hypothermia.
But before we get into the failures, we have to understand the machine. I mean, why does this matter? Why should you, the listener, care about the thermodynamics of your liver?
Because temperature regulation is the absolute baseline for life. It's not about comfort. It's about enzyme kinetics.
Okay, enzyme kinetics.
Every single chemical reaction that keeps you alive, from your heart beating to your brain processing this sentence right now, it all relies on enzymes. And enzymes are incredibly picky. They're divas. They only work at a very specific temperature. If you swing too far up or down, the chemical reactions just stop.
And you stop.
You stop.
So let's pop the hood. Let's start with the architecture of this furnace. The source material draws a very, very sharp line between two concepts, the core and the shell.
Right, and this is the fundamental distinction. When we say body temperature, we're usually using a shorthand. We're acting like your whole body is one uniform temperature, but it's really not.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, my hands right now are actually pretty cold, but I don't feel cold in general. My chest feels fine.
Exactly. You have the core. This is like the VIP area, the deep tissues, the heart, the lungs, the brain, the abdominal organs. This is the furnace itself.
Okay.
And the temperature here is remarkably constant. The text says it stays within a margin of plus or minus 1 degree Fahrenheit, so about 0.6 degrees Celsius.
That margin of error is incredibly small when you think about it.
It's almost a flat line. And it holds that line even if the air outside ranges from, say, 55 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The core is homeostatic. It is protected at all costs.
And then you have the shell.
Right. The shell is the skin and the subcutaneous tissues. The shell is the radiator, but it's also the sacrificial layer.
The sacrificial layer.
Its temperature rises and falls with the surroundings. It acts as a radiator, or it acts as an insulator, depending entirely on what the core needs.
So when my hands are cold, that's not a failure of the system. That's actually the system working perfectly.
Precisely. Your body has made a decision. It's decided, okay, it's cold outside. I'm going to stop sending all this warm blood to the hands. I'm going to sacrifice the shell temperature to keep the heart and brain at 98.6.
It's a strategic withdrawal.
It's pulling the troops back to the castle.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about that number, 98.6. We all grow up hearing it. Is it a myth? Is it real?
It's an oversimplification. Normal is a range, and it depends heavily on where you measure it.
The source highlights that an orally measured temperature, under the tongue averages between 98.0 and 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
But, and this is the part people forget, if you measure rectally, it's usually about 1 degree higher.
Why is that? I mean, aside from the obvious anatomical difference, why is the temperature actually different?
Well, it comes down to physics. The mouth is a cavity, but it's connected to the outside world. You're breathing air in and out.
Right.
There's evaporation happening on your tongue, and that cools the oral cavity just slightly. The rectum is deep core. It's insulated. It's a much truer representation of that visceral furnace temperature.
That makes perfect sense. And the text also mentions variability based on what you're doing.
Oh, huge variability. If you are engaging in hard exercise, let's say you're running a marathon, your core temp can temporarily spike to 101 or even 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wait, 104? That sounds like a really high fever.
It is the temperature of a fever, but it is not a fever. And we'll get into that distinction later. But essentially, that's just the engine running hot because you're revving it so high.
Got it.
And conversely, in extreme cold, the core can drop below 96. So the takeaway here is, don't panic if the thermometer doesn't say exactly 98.6. Context is everything.
So looking at this whole system, it really all just boils down to a fundamental equation. It's a balance sheet.
It's a math problem. Heat production versus heat loss. If
Mm.
the rate of production is greater than the rate of loss, your temperature rises.
You heat up.
If the rate of loss is greater than the rate of production, your temperature falls.
We cool down.
And your hypothalamus, the brain's control center, is constantly, second by second, trying to balance this equation to zero.
So let's look at the production side first. The furnace itself. Where does this heat actually come from? Because, we're not burning coal inside of us.
No, we are burning chemical bonds.
Yeah.
Heat is the ultimate waste product of metabolism. And the source lists several specific burners that we have. The baseline, the absolute minimum, is your BMR, your basal metabolic rate.
And that's kind of the idling speed of the engine?
Correct. Even if you are just lying perfectly still or even in a coma, your cells are doing work. They're pumping ions across membranes. They're synthesizing proteins. All that work requires energy, and the inefficiency of that work releases heat.
Oh, we can ramp that up.
Dramatically.
Okay.
The single biggest variable is muscle activity. When you move, you burn energy. Muscles are essentially heat engines that also happen to create movement.
I like that. Heat engines.
In fact, muscles are surprisingly inefficient at movement. Most of the energy they burn actually turns into heat, not motion. And this, of course, includes shivering, which we'll get into later as a special case.
And the list goes on. I see thyroxine effect here in the notes.
Yes, thyroxine is a hormone from your thyroid gland. You can think of thyroxine as the long-term idle adjustment screw on your furnace. If you live in a cold climate, your thyroid ramps up production of it. Thyroxine increases the rate of chemical activity in almost all your cells. It just makes the fire burn hotter, 24/7.
And then you have the quick response. Sympathetic stimulation. Epinephrine.
Adrenaline. This creates a really rapid but short-term spike in cellular metabolism. This is like the turbo boost for heat production.
And it's interesting that digestion is on the list, too. The thermogenic effect of food.
Exactly. People joke about the meat sweats.
Right.
But it's a real thing. Digestion, absorption, and storing food all require energy, and they all generate heat. The liver, in particular, gets very, very active after a big meal, and the liver is one of the hottest organs in the body.
So the body isn't passive. It has multiple dials it can turn to increase heat production.
Multiple dials, multiple burners. It's an active system.
Okay, so we're generating all this heat. We are constantly churning out BTUs. If we didn't get rid of it, we'd cook ourselves from the inside out in just a matter of hours. So let's talk about the radiator. This is section 3, heat loss physics.
And this is where the physics gets really cool. The first part of this is our insulator system, which is comprised of the skin, the subcutaneous tissues, and specifically fat.
Fat. Finally, a benefit to my spare tire.
It is a benefit. Fat conducts heat only 1/3 as readily as other tissues. The source describes it as a biological wetsuit.
A wetsuit, okay.
It allows the skin temperature to drop way down while keeping the internal core nice and warm. And interestingly, the text notes that women generally have better insulation than men just due to typical fat distribution.
So they are better biologically equipped for the cold in that sense.
In terms of insulation, yes, they are better designed to retain core heat. But the primary way we actually move heat from the core to the skin is through the blood. You have to think of the circulatory system as a heat pipe.
A heat pipe, I like that analogy.
Blood carries heat from the deep tissues, the liver, the heart out, to the venous plexus, which is this incredibly rich network of capillaries sitting right beneath the skin. And this is where the body has a crucial control valve. You can do two things, vasoconstriction or vasodilation.
All right, define those for us quickly.
Vasoconstriction is clamping down. The nervous system tells the blood vessels to shrink. Blood flow to the skin drops to almost zero. And when that happens, the skin becomes a high-efficiency insulator.
So the heat stays locked in the core.
Vasodilation is the complete opposite. The vessels open wide. Blood flow can increase to as high as 30% of your total cardiac output just going to the skin to dump heat.
30%, that's a huge amount of blood flow.
It's massive, and the source says it creates an 8-fold difference in heat conductance between fully constricted and fully dilated. It's the difference between having the windows of your house sealed shut or having them all wide open.
Okay, so once the heat actually gets to the skin, how does it leave the body? The source breaks this down into 4 key mechanisms, and this is where that nude person in a room stat comes in.
Right. Mechanism number 1, and this is the biggest factor by far, is radiation. In a normal room temperature setting, A nude person loses about 60% of their heat through radiation.
So what does that actually mean? Are we radiating light?
You're radiating infrared heat rays. All objects that aren't at absolute zero temperature radiate heat rays. The walls, the furniture, your body. If your body is hotter than the walls of the room, you radiate heat to them. If the walls were somehow hotter than you would absorb heat from them. It's a constant exchange of electromagnetic waves.
That is just wild to think about. I'm sitting here right now, silently beaming infrared rays at the microphone.
You're basically a light bulb, just in the infrared spectrum.
Okay, the second mechanism is conduction. This is more intuitive. It's direct transfer.
Yes. If you sit on a cold metal chair, heat flows directly from your skin to the chair. The molecules in your skin vibrate against the molecules of the chair, and they transfer energy.
But the source says this is actually a pretty small percentage, usually.
Only about 3% to solid objects. But we also conduct heat to the air right next to us, and that accounts for about 15%.
Okay.
However, there's a catch. Conductive loss to air is self-limiting. Once the layer of air right next to your skin heats up to body temperature, the loss stops. You create this little zone of warm air around you like a blanket.
Unless that air moves.
Exactly.
Oh.
And that brings us to mechanism number 3, convection. This is the wind factor.
The wind factor.
Air currents, or wind, replace that warm air next to your skin with new, cool air. So you're constantly conducting heat to new air molecules over and over.
And the math here is specific. The cooling effect is proportional to the square root of the wind velocity.
Right. So a wind of 4 miles per hour is about twice as effective for cooling as a wind of 1 mile per hour. It implies diminishing returns, but that initial breeze makes a massive difference. It's why wind chill is a real thing.
Now, I have to ask about water, because the source makes a big deal about the difference between standing in cold air versus falling into cold water.
Oh, a huge difference. Water has a specific heat that is thousands of times greater than air, and it conducts heat about 26 times faster.
26 times faster.
If you fall into cold water, you don't form that insulating zone next to your skin. The water just strips the heat away instantly and continuously. That's why you can get hypothermia in 60-degree water very, very quickly, whereas 60-degree air feels pretty pleasant.
That brings us to the fourth and final mechanism, evaporation.
This is our emergency cooling system. This is our ace in the hole. When water evaporates from the body surface, 0.58 calories of heat are lost for every single gram of water.
And we are always evaporating a little bit, right? Even if we aren't sweating.
Correct. That's called insensible evaporation. We lose about 600 to 700 milliliters a day just through the skin and the lungs simply by existing. You can't control that. But the controllable part, active sweating, is absolutely critical.
Why is it so critical?
Because of the limits of physics. Think about it. Radiation, conduction, and convection only work to cool you down if the environment is cooler than you are.
Right. Heat flows from hot to cold. It's a fundamental law.
So what happens if the air temperature is 105 degrees Fahrenheit? That is hotter than your body.
So, radiation and conduction would start adding heat to your body.
You become the cold object absorbing heat.
Mm.
Exactly. At that point, evaporation becomes the only way to cool down.
Wow.
If you couldn't sweat in that environment, your body temperature would just skyrocket and you would die of heat stroke very quickly. The text mentions people who are born with a congenital absence of sweat glands. They can handle cold just fine, but they cannot survive in the tropics.
That is a sobering thought. It makes you appreciate sweat a lot more.
It really does.
Speaking of which, let's do a deep dive into Section 4, the mechanism of sweating. Because, as you said, it's not just water leaking out of us. It's a complex glandular process.
It is. It all starts in the brain. The anterior hypothalamus triggers sweating via the autonomic nervous system. But let's look at the gland itself. It has two parts. A coiled, deep portion, and then a duct that carries the fluid up to the surface.
And the coiled part, it creates the precursor fluid. What's in that?
It's actually very similar to blood plasma, just without the proteins. It has high concentrations of sodium and chloride.
So it's salty.
Very salty. But here is the magic trick. As that fluid moves up the duct toward the skin surface, the cells that line the duct actively reabsorb most of the sodium and chloride back into the body.
Why do they do that? Why not just sweat it out?
To conserve salt. Your body loves salt and needs it for nerve signals, for muscle contractions. It doesn't want to just waste it. So if you're sweating lightly, the fluid moves slowly. The duct has plenty of time to reabsorb almost all the salt. The resulting sweat that hits your skin is very dilute. It's mostly just water.
But what if I'm sprinting? What if I'm sweating buckets?
Then the fluid is moving through that duct too fast. The reabsorption mechanism just can't keep up. So the sweat that comes out has a much higher salt content. This is why heavy sweating leads to electrolyte loss.
And it explains why sweat stings your eyes more during a really intense workout.
That's a big part of it.
Now, the source brings up acclimatization. This is the training effect. If I move to Florida in the middle of summer, I'm miserable for a week, but then I kind of get used to it. What is physically changing in my body?
A fascinating adaptation occurs over about 1 to 6 weeks. First, your sweating capacity itself increases dramatically. An unacclimatized person might be able to produce 1 liter of sweat per hour.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot,
Yeah.
but after acclimatization, that can go up to 2 to 3 liters per hour.
Yeah.
That is a 10-fold increase in your maximum heat removal capability.
Wow, so your body just learns to open the floodgates.
But it gets smarter, too. Remember that salt conservation we just talked about?
Yeah?
Acclimatization causes the adrenal glands to secrete a hormone called aldosterone.
Aldosterone, I've heard of that. It's involved in blood pressure, right?
It is. But here, it tells the sweat glands to reabsorb sodium even more aggressively. So an unacclimatized person might lose 15 to 30 grams of salt a day in extreme heat.
That's a lot of salt.
It's a dangerous amount. An acclimatized person, they only lose 3 to 5 grams.
That is a massive efficiency upgrade. It's like a software patch for your sweat glands.
It really is. It allows you to stay active in the heat without completely collapsing from salt depletion.
Before we leave this section, the text mentions panting. Humans don't pant, well, unless we're really out of shape. But dogs do it all the time. How does that work?
Right. So animals with fur can't sweat effectively because the fur would just trap the moisture and block evaporation.
Makes sense.
So they use panting instead. It's a behavioral mechanism. They take these rapid, shallow breaths to move air over the tongue in their respiratory passages. The evaporation of saliva from those surfaces cools the blood flowing underneath.
But wouldn't breathing that fast make them pass out from hypoventilation?
You would think so, but the source points out that panting uses very small breaths that only ventilate the dead space in the windpipe, not the deep lungs themselves.
So they're not blowing off too much carbon dioxide.
Exactly. They avoid respiratory alkalosis. It's a very clever, very controlled process.
Nature is clever. Okay, let's move to the control center. Section 5, the thermostat. We keep saying the brain, but specifically, we're talking about the hypothalamus.
The hypothalamus is the CEO of temperature regulation, but it has different departments.
Mm-hmm.
The primary sensor is in what's called the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area.
That is a mouthful. Let's just call it the sensor.
Fair enough, the sensor. This area contains both heat-sensitive and cold-sensitive neurons. But here's the interesting part. The heat-sensitive neurons are predominant. They're way more numerous and sensitive.
Okay.
If the temperature of the blood flowing through this area rises, these neurons increase their firing rate dramatically, like 2 to 10-fold. They are incredibly sensitive to being hot.
So the brain is monitoring its own temperature directly, second by second.
Yes, but it's also taking reports from the field. We have temperature receptors in the skin and also in the deep body, like in the spinal cord and the abdominal viscera.
And the skin receptors are different, right? I read that they're biased.
They are. While the brain is great at sensing heat, the skin is absolutely loaded with cold receptors. There are about 10 times more cold receptors in your skin than warm receptors.
Why the bias toward cold?
It's likely evolutionary. Preventing hypothermia is a more immediate, life-threatening reflex. The skin detects cold and sends an urgent warning signal to the brain saying, hey, it's getting chilly out here. You should probably start the heaters before the core temperature actually drops.
It's an early warning system.
It is.
So the anterior hypothalamus, the sensor, it's sensing the blood temp. The skin is sensing the outside temp. Where does all this information go?
It all gets funneled to the posterior hypothalamus. This is the integrator. It takes the signals from the sensor in the brain and the signals from the skin, it combines them, it weighs them, and it makes a decision about what to do.
So once that decision is made, we enter section 6, effector mechanisms, how the body actually reacts. So let's simulate 2 scenarios. Scenario A, the body is too hot. What does the posterior hypothalamus do?
It initiates 3 main actions. First, vasodilation. It sends signals to inhibit the sympathetic centers that usually keep the blood vessels tight. The vessels in the skin just pop open, and hot blood rushes to the surface to radiate heat away.
Step 1, open the windows.
Step 2, sweating. If the core temperature passes a very specific critical level, the text says it's about 37.1 degrees Celsius, sweating begins sharply.
Step 2, turn on the sprinklers.
And step 3, decrease heat production. It sends inhibitory signals to turn off any shivering and to stop chemical thermogenesis.
Step 3, turn down the furnace. Simple enough. Now, scenario B, the body is too cold.
This response is a bit more aggressive. First, vasoconstriction. The sympathetic nervous system clamps down hard on the blood flow to the skin, save all the heat for the core.
Seal the windows, got it.
Second, piloerection. Goosebumps?
No, wait. Goosebumps have always seemed completely useless to me. I get bumpy, but I really don't feel any warmer.
And you're right. In humans, it is vestigial, doesn't do much of anything. But you have to think about our furry ancestors.
Okay.
When those little erector pili muscles contract, the hair stands up straight. This traps a thick layer of air right next to the skin, which is a fantastic insulator. It's like an animal putting on its own puffer jacket.
For us, it's just a reminder of our evolutionary past.
So goosebumps are useless for us. What's the third, more effective mechanism?
Increase heat production, thermogenesis. And the star of the show here is, of course, shivering.
What exactly is shivering? Is it just random shaking?
No, it's highly organized. The text explains it as a feedback oscillation of the muscle spindle stretch reflex.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me. Basically, the hypothalamus sends a signal that increases the overall tone of your skeletal muscles. They get tense. When that tension gets high enough, it triggers a stretch reflex, which causes a brief contraction, and that cycle repeats really fast. This oscillation shivering generates a tremendous amount of heat. It can increase your body's heat production by 4 to 5 times.
Wow, just from shivering, that's significant.
Very, but it's not the only way. There's also chemical thermogenesis.
Right.
This is fascinating. Sympathetic excitation releases epinephrine, adrenaline, which has the ability to uncouple oxidative phosphorylation in certain cells.
Uncouples what now?
In simple terms,
Yeah.
normally, your cells burn food to create ATP, which is the energy currency they use to do work.
Right.
Epinephrine can flip a switch in the process so that when you burn food, the energy is released directly as heat, skipping the ATP step entirely. It's inefficient for creating usable energy, but it's fantastic for creating warmth in an emergency.
And this relates to brown fat, right?
Yes. Brown fat is a special type of fat that's just packed with mitochondria, and it's specialized for this exact kind of chemical heat production. Infants have a lot of it, especially between their shoulder blades.
Okay.
They can't shiver well, so they use their brown fat. It can increase their heat production by 100%. Adults.
Okay.
We have very little of it left. We mostly have to rely on shivering.
One last heating mechanism on the list here, thyroxine.
This is the long game. This is adaptation. If you're exposed to cold for several weeks, your thyroid gland actually hypertrophies. It gets bigger.
It grows.
It grows, and it pumps out more thyroxine.
Yeah.
This raises your entire basal metabolic rate. You're just burning hotter all the time.
So people like Arctic explorers or military personnel who are stationed in the Arctic for long periods, they actually have higher metabolisms.
Yes. The source mentions some isolated measurements showing metabolic rates 20 to 40% higher in people who are chronically adapted to extreme colds. But again, it takes weeks for that to kick in.
That is just incredible adaptability. Now, section 7, the concept of the set point. We've touched on this, but let's drill down. The text says the critical temperature is 37.1 degrees Celsius.
That's the magic number. 98.8 Fahrenheit's the set point. Above this number, you sweat intensely. Below this number, you shiver intensely.
And the system is incredibly aggressive about defending this number. The source uses the term feedback gain.
Right. Feedback gain is a technical measure of how effective a control system is.
Yeah,
For something like blood pressure control, the gain is about 2. That's considered pretty good.
Okay.
But for temperature control, the feedback gain is about 27.
27, that is a huge difference.
It's massive.
Yeah.
It means the body fights a change in temperature with 27 times more intensity than the error itself. It is extremely intolerant of any deviation from that set point.
But the set point isn't set in stone, is it? The source says the skin temperature can actually change it.
This is one of the coolest parts. It's called anticipatory control. If your skin gets cold, the hypothalamus anticipates that the core temperature is going to drop soon. So it preemptively shifts the set point. It raises the shivering threshold. It makes you start shivering before your deep core temperature has actually dropped at all.
It's seeing the future. It's saying the skin is cold, winter is coming, start the fire now.
Exactly. It prevents the drop rather than just reacting to it after it happens. It's proactive.
Now, here is where it gets really, really interesting for me. Section 8, abnormalities. Specifically fever. I think most people, myself included, misunderstand fever. We think it means our body is broken.
Right, that's the common perception. But a fever is not a broken thermostat. It is a thermostat that has been deliberately and purposefully reset to a higher level.
Okay, walk us through the mechanism. How does a bacteria get into my body and cause a fever?
Okay, let's trace the whole pass. A bacteria enters your body. It might release toxins, or maybe parts of its cell wall are toxic. These substances are called pyrogens.
Pyrogens? Fire starters?
Literally. So your immune system, specifically your leukocytes, your white blood cells, they find and they phagocytize or eat these bacteria.
Okay.
As they digest them, the leukocytes release their own chemical messengers called cytokines. The most famous one is interleukin-1,
So the white blood cell eats the invader and then sends out a chemical message.
a victory signal or a warning signal. That message, interleukin-1, travels through the blood to the hypothalamus, and upon reaching the brain, it induces the formation of a local hormone called prostaglandin E2.
Prostaglandin.
And here is the absolute key. Prostaglandins act directly on the hypothalamus to physically change the set point.
So the prostaglandin goes into the control room and it turns the dial from 98.6 to, say, 103.
Correct. Now, this creates a really strange situation for your body. The thermostat is set to 103, but your blood is currently at 98.6.
So the brain thinks we're freezing.
Exactly. This is the chills. Even though you aren't actually cold, your brain thinks you are because of this new higher set point. So it immediately initiates all the cold defense mechanisms.
So you get vasoconstriction?
Your skin goes pale and cold, you get goosebumps, and you start shivering violently.
That explains perfectly why when you're first getting sick, you're buried under 5 blankets, shivering like crazy. But if someone touches your forehead, you're burning up.
You are shivering to generate heat to reach that new 103-degree goal. And you will keep shivering until your blood temperature reaches 103. Once you hit that target, the shivering stops. You are now regulated, but at a higher temperature.
And this is where something like aspirin comes in. How does aspirin stop this whole process?
Aspirin and other similar drugs are called antipyretics. They work by blocking the enzyme that creates prostaglandins from a precursor called arachidonic acid.
So if there are no prostaglandins, the dial doesn't get turned up.
Exactly. If you block the prostaglandins, the set point cannot be raised or it's brought back down. The fever is aborted or at least reduced.
Okay, so what happens when the fever breaks? We've all been there. You wake up in the middle of the night, just drenched in sweat.
This is called the crisis or the flush. So let's say the bacteria are finally gone or you took some Tylenol that's kicked in. The pyrogens are gone, so the prostaglandin production stops. The set point in your brain suddenly drops back down to 98.6.
But your body is still physically at 103.
Right. Now the brain sees the opposite error. It looks around and says, whoa, it's 103 in here, but the dial is set to 98.6. We are dangerously overheating.
So it does the complete opposite of the chills.
The complete opposite. It triggers intense, profuse sweating. It triggers massive vasodilation. Your skin gets hot and flushed. You're dumping heat as fast as you possibly can to get back down to normal. That's the fever breaking.
It's essentially a biological roller coaster, and it's all controlled by that one little dial in the hypothalamus.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
But sometimes that roller coaster crashes. So let's talk about Section 9. Extreme abnormalities. Let's start with heat stroke.
This is terrifying. Heat stroke occurs when the body temperature rises beyond a critical level, usually above 105 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit.
Why is this different from just a really high fever?
Because in heat stroke, the regulation system itself fails. It gets overwhelmed, and it sets up a vicious, deadly cycle. Remember we said the heat is a byproduct of metabolism?
Yes.
Well, a fundamental rule of chemistry is that chemical reactions speed up when it's hot. So as your body gets hotter, your overall metabolism speeds up, which generates more heat, which makes you even hotter, which speeds up metabolism even further.
It's a positive feedback loop. It's a runaway train.
Exactly. The body stops being able to regulate at all. You get dizziness, delirium, eventually loss of consciousness. The text notes that local hemorrhages and degeneration of neurons can occur. This can cause permanent brain damage very quickly.
And the treatment is just brute force cooling.
Brute force. Rapid cooling. An ice bath, a cold water spray, a sponge bath. You have to physically break that cycle from the outside because the body can no longer do it physiologically.
And on the other end of the spectrum, we have extreme cold exposure, hypothermia.
Yes. Below a core temp of about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the hypothalamus itself loses its ability to regulate. The thermostat essentially goes offline.
And the source says below 94 degrees, chemical heat production actually drops because the enzymes themselves are slowing down.
Right. It's another vicious cycle, but just in reverse. You get colder, your metabolism slows down, so you produce less heat, which makes you get even colder. It leads to sleepiness, coma, and eventually the heart just stops.
The source mentions frostbite specifically. This isn't just being cold. This is when the surface areas literally freeze solid.
Ice crystals form inside the cells. This causes permanent, irreversible damage. When the tissue thaws, gangrene often sets in. But there's one last weird phenomenon the text describes called cold-induced vasodilation.
The hunter's response.
Yes. Usually in the cold, your vessels constrict to save heat. But when a piece of tissue, like your fingertip, gets near freezing, the smooth muscle in the vessel wall becomes paralyzed by the extreme cold. It suddenly relaxes and dilates.
So you get a sudden flush of warm blood.
You get a sudden rush of warm blood to that freezing nose or ear or fingertip. It helps prevent it from actually freezing solid. It cycles. It'll constrict, get close to freezing, then flush with warm blood, then constrict again. It's a final, desperate defense mechanism.
Man, the body fights so hard to stay alive. It's incredible.
It is, from the quantum level to the systemic level.
We've covered the furnace, the radiator, the thermostat, and what happens when it all fails. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway for you from all this?
For me, it's the sheer elegance of the system. We often think of biology as this, messy, squishy thing, but this is precise engineering, the physics of radiation, that feedback gain of 27, the molecular switch of prostaglandins. It is a beautifully designed control system that is operating perfectly in a very chaotic world.
For me, it's the practical stuff, really understanding why wind chill hurts. It's convection stripping away that insulating air layer. And knowing that a fever is a deliberate strategy, not just a random symptom. It completely changes how I look at being sick.
Absolutely. It's an active defense.
Now, here's a final provocative thought for our listeners to mull over as we finish. The source material briefly mentions something called artificial hypothermia. It says doctors can cool a person way down, so far down, that they can stop their heart for an hour during surgery without causing any brain damage.
Right. By slowing the metabolism down to a crawl, you reduce the brain's need for oxygen to almost nothing.
So if we can manipulate this set point, either physically with cooling blankets or maybe one day chemically, are we looking at the future of human hibernation? Could we induce a state of suspended animation for, say, long-term space travel just by learning how to tweak the hypothalamus?
If we can master that set point, who knows? The machinery is all there. We just need to learn how to drive it ourselves.
Something to think about the next time you reach for a blanket or turn on a fan. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the human furnace.
Stay warm or cool, whichever you need.
See you next time.